Can you think about some of the things that we've heard from people and the reactions we've gotten when people find out that we live completely off-grid in the mountains of Idaho?
Number one, they say, are you guys staying warm up there?
Okay.
Do you have running water? Do you
Power, water, internet.
Do you homeschool?
Do you homeschool?
How do your kids get to school?
Are you preppers? Are you on disability? Do you have a job?
Are you hermits?
Are you hiding from somebody? But then on the flip side, the positive we've heard, sustainable living, freedom.
I've had several people say to me, I would do it, but I can't get my wife on board.
And many people have also said we would do that, we would live up there, we would do what you're doing, but we're not willing to put the effort in that it takes.
Or we can't at the moment, but we look forward to it, or...
These are some of the...
If I was younger,
sure.
I could do it.
We've heard it all. We've heard it all. Later on in the video, we're going to get seriously into what it means to live off-grid, what you'd in fact have to have and don't have to have, and the bottom line is who defines what off-grid is. Is that yours? What's up now? What do I do? What do I do? You do.
You bit my butt.
I ate turkey. The jerky one.
No.
You protect me, huh? You protect me, huh?
Dad,
Yeah.
there's water coming out from under the sink over here.
Which sink?
This bathroom one.
Is it bad?
Yeah.
What'd you do? Bye. I spent most of the week finishing up the paint and trim work, so we were able to get the front room back together. But at the first part of the week, I had one more appointment with my dentist to get one of the last of my silver fillings removed. After 35 years, they were overdue. As the dentist finished up with me, he made the comment that I could use cayenne pepper instead of ibuprofen because he assumed that because we live off-grid, I would naturally fall back on herbs before I would use ibuprofen as an anti-inflammatory. This got me reflecting on the number of different reactions we've gotten from people as they hear the words off-grid. When I got home, I told Cedar the story, and she smiled because, again, she has had similar experiences. When people hear that word off-grid, it seems to drum up all different kinds of reactions. The problem with the abundance of reality TV is people reference shows like Alaskan Bush People as the standard for off-grid living. In my honest opinion, that was a social experiment gone bad. But even so, they are the furthest thing from a standard for off-grid living. If I ever roll a house again, I will. I don't know. I ain't decided yet. I can't do it.
Do you know how lucky you are you haven't had to use a ladder to paint all this?
Yeah, that's true.
You just reach right up there. How tall are the ceilings?
8 feet. The deeper Cedar and I got into this lifestyle, the more we realized that we could have the same amenities here, completely off-grid, that we could have in town. The only difference is we might have to be a little bit more sparing about when we use things like the dishwasher. Naturally, when Cedar uses the dishwasher or the washing machine, she checks the solar inverter to check the level on the battery bank, ensuring that there's sufficient energy to get these jobs done. While there have been many other people take things to extreme when living off-grid, the one person that inspired me the most in the beginning was Dick Prinicky. Crazy dogs. You're scratching me. I've told his story before, and if you're not familiar with him, look him up. He spent over 35 years on and off, living completely isolated in the Alaskan wilderness, again, completely off-grid. While he was an absolute craftsman, he did not have running water, he did not have plumbing, he most certainly didn't have internet, and he didn't use propane. But he also didn't have a family of 5 that he had to be concerned about. Now, as much as we love this lifestyle, there is definitely a give and take. For instance, right now, the road would fall into that category. One of the other things that we have complete responsibility for, besides the road, is our trash.
Come on.
As things get thrown away, Cedar separates the recyclable. She then hand delivers these things that can be recyclable to the only place in town that accepts them, and everything else gets burned. We use as much cardboard and paper as we can for fire starter. But at some point, we end up having to burn the trash, typically once, maybe even twice a week. Does the fact that we burn our trash somehow lower us on the scale of eco-friendliness? And if it does, so be it. Because if I did throw it in the back of my truck and drive it the 7 miles into town to the dump where it would be buried, I'm sure I would be putting more carbon into the air from my diesel truck than I would be from burning it here at the property. Traditionally, homesteads had a dump or a waste pile somewhere on the property, and that's just how it was. One of the best parts about our journey is sharing this with our kids. While at times we worry about our kids as they're driving up the road just to get here, because again, the road conditions right now are as bad as they can get because of the runoff. When our kids are here, this is when we find ourselves the happiest. I love the fact that our kids are constantly messing with me. Pranking me, I think, is what they call it. Usually Cheyenne's the brains of the outfit, but it's fun. But every once in a while I have to remind the kids that I can play that game too. Again, these are the beautiful memories we've created for the long term. After getting the ceiling fans installed and making sure they work properly, I wanted to clean up the concrete before we put the couch back in place and get the concrete ready for the stain and seal that we will likely put on it next week.
I think the milk has gone bad.
You should check it.
That's funny. That made me laugh.
That was my idea.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. Life would not be complete without my wife and kids in them. Doing what we've done up here at the ranch would not bring the value that it has brought if I was doing this by myself. One of the last things that Cedar and I wanted to get taken care of was getting our year supply of food brought up here to the ranch. It's been sitting in our storage unit since we moved in here full time. We took the kids into town and loaded my truck up, getting the rice, the beans, the wheat, and the other things that we've packed around for the last 20 years, ensuring that if something happened, we would have the sufficient food for our family while we figured things out. The utility room is a bit of a mess, but I'm about to make some changes to our water filtration system. Excuse my ability to talk right now. The whole right side of my face is numb. I just had a couple of more 35-year-old fillings removed from my mouth and I can barely talk. But I want to get this done before the kids get home. We've contemplated putting in some sort of a water softener because tankless water heaters have a tendency to build up calcium on their burners. This filter is called a product preservers. And it's basically just an anti-scale filter. The filter has to be replaced every 2 years. It's a 3/4 inch filter, but we have a 1-inch main, and so I'm not going to put it on the main line. I'm only going to put it on the 3/4 inch line feeding the water heater. This should hopefully cut way down on the amount of minerals that are getting to the burner assembly, and ultimately ending up in our aerators and our shower heads as well. Okay, this is the water line coming in, feeding the first filter, which is about a 5-micron filter. I change this filter about every 6 months. This is about a $25 to $35 filter. Then it goes through the ultraviolet light, which I know by the lights it's on and working. Then it comes over and breaks off the main line and goes into the anti-scale filter. This is the brand new filter. This goes into the water heater, comes out the other side, and this is the newest sediment filter just for anything that might break off. And what this does is this prevents anything going to the aerators, going to the dishwasher, going to anything that could clog up as far as sediment's concerned. Then that goes on and goes to the rest of the house. So.
What even is that?
You were going on a cruise, why?
I thought you were
Are you gonna put it on your truck?
I thought you were gonna surprise us with that. Oh
My high-class invention. Since you guys were messing with me, I decided to show you how you're...
Wait, does it have a compressor?
Yeah.
my!
Okay, touch the black wire. I ran outside and pulled the battery out of the 4-wheeler. Touch the black wire on that side. It's not going to shock you.
Wait, where?
Now touch the white wire on the other side. Take that. I gotta sit way down. Let's go get it. Usually you're in. This is not specific to some major catastrophe, but could be as simple as me losing my job. Okay, let's do this. Rat, we need to take everything out of my truck. Stand over here.
You want this salt, right?
Yeah. But in light of what's happening around us, with the so-called potential pandemic, we wanted to have our food up at the ranch. Here, Fred. We nearly made it out of winter without touching the firewood reserves that are stacked up against the shop foundation, but we've needed just a little bit more to stay warm. So Rhett and I and Reed stacked it up, ensuring that these last few cold nights that we have, we will stay sufficiently warm.
What comes on?
So let's talk about the origin of the word off-grid. That is a reference to what?
Just not being tied to power.
That's the power grid. Okay, we are not tied to the power grid. We are 2.5 miles away from the nearest power line. Is we don't have the monthly expenses associated with our home that normally we would in town. But at the same time, when the water goes down, it's my responsibility. So let's talk about some of these comments we got real quick on Instagram. And by the way, we thank you guys for contributing. We had hundreds of comments on Instagram and Facebook. It's been fun to read them. Almost across the board, probably the bulk of the comments talked about utilities, not being dependent upon utilities. We are somewhat dependent on propane. So once a year, we'll fill up our 1,000-gallon propane tank just to be safe. But even if we didn't have that, we could survive. We just wouldn't have hot water. We wouldn't have dryer, and we wouldn't have our stove. We'd have to cook on the wood stove. The other word that comes up all the time with off-grid is the word prepper. And are we preppers? I get that question from time to time. In a nutshell, as a father, as parents, 20 years ago, we decided that we would have enough food around to feed our family for at least a year if something bad happened.
And we're taking the basics like wheat, rice, beans, oats, some of those things that can store for a long time, but that we use frequently too, so we could go through them.
And my parents did the same thing. My grandparents did the same thing. My great grandparents did the same thing. That years ago, this was a process where people canned and bottled and put food away for the cold months, and that they always had sufficient food around. We're in the middle of some crazy stuff right now between the potential, pandemic and whether or not it's even going to amount to anything. I don't know. And then on top of that, this week's been one of the roughest weeks on the stock market in quite some time. So we can get by if we have to. But again, let's talk about some of the other comments. The comments were anywhere from Ted Kaczynski to just simply being disconnected from.
Independent, self-reliant.
Somebody said if you don't have internet, you're off grid. So we have satellite internet, but we're not tied to any grid. I pay a small fortune to be able to upload videos from my laptop over there when we upload videos to YouTube. So,
and we kind of feel like as long as we have kids in the home and as long as we're, doing videos or whatever, that's a necessity.
We're not trying to disconnect from anything. We love the deeper that we've gotten into this lifestyle. We've always been avid gardeners. We've always had chickens. Wherever we lived, we've always lived that lifestyle. Now we're trying to do it on a much larger scale. I would love, one of my long-term, short-term goals is to get to where we're producing all the vegetables, all the food that our family consumes in a year right here on our place. But that's going to take some time and some serious effort to do. Mm-hmm. What other comments can we get?
Hard work.
Hard work.
There's a lot of things about hard work.
A number of people said, I would love to have it, but I'm not willing to put the effort in to get it. So
one of my favorite comments was the one that said marching to the beat of your own drum.
For sure.
I loved that one.
Yeah, we're
true.
Good and bad. If something goes wrong with our water system, which happened a few months back, and I had to overnight a converter in to where we could run our water pump off of a generator. I'm not calling the city to come handle that for us. We have to take care of that stuff ourselves. So.
Well, I'm not calling the city. I'm calling you.
Yeah.
And I'm
anyway,
hey, come help me out here.
There are expenses for sure associated with the way that we live, but the freedom, that was a word that came up over and over and over again, was freedom. Mm-hmm. There is a freedom, almost an emotional thing. I'll tell you, the day that I turned on the light switches for the first time that was being powered from our solar system, it was an emotional experience.
Like when I turned on the dishwasher, that was emotional. That was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. We're in the middle of nowhere and this thing is working. Because of the sun, literally because of the sun and awesome batteries. But